At 2:41 in the morning, the tactical display aboard an American destroyer lit up with 3 fast-moving contacts slicing across the black water of the Strait of Hormuz. They were closing fast, too fast, 48 knots, and accelerating. 1 minute later, every watch officer on the bridge understood the same terrifying truth. This was no routine shadowing mission. This was a test, a challenge, and possibly the first move in something far bigger. The night was moonless. The sea looked calm from a distance, but in that narrow throat between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, calm meant nothing. Every captain in those waters knew the same rule. The most dangerous moments were always the quiet ones. To the south, a U.S. carrier strike group held formation in the Gulf of Oman, its aircraft carrier surrounded by a hard shell of escorts, to radar pickets, and overlapping layers of missile defense. To the north, closer to the choke point, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer and a guided missile cruiser were screening commercial traffic and watching every inch of the horizon. Above them, an E-2 airborne early warning aircraft traced circles in the dark. Beneath them, sonar teams listened for the one sound no one ever wanted to hear. Then the Iranian boats appeared. At first, they looked like the same aggressive patrol craft the region had seen before. Small silhouettes, low profile, fast hulls built for one purpose: to get close before anyone could decide whether they were bluffing. But this time the approach was different. The formation was tighter, more disciplined, no weaving, no showmanship. They were coming in on vectors designed to split the destroyer's attention and force the Americans to expose their intentions. Within moments, the situation spiraled out of control. The officer of the deck gave the first warning over bridge-to-bridge radio. Clear, professional, repeated twice, no response. The Iranian craft kept coming. On the Combat Information Center screens below, the geometry began to look ugly. One contact moved to the starboard quarter, another cut across the bow. The third stayed just far enough away to force the American fire control team to keep it in the solution. That was the point. Not to attack yet, to complicate, to saturate, to make every second count. This was exactly how naval pressure worked in one of the most militarized waterways on Earth. Not with a giant fleet battle, not with a dramatic declaration, but with inches, angles, and timing. Iran's naval doctrine had never depended on matching the United States ship for ship. It didn't have to. In shallow, crowded water, speed and proximity could become weapons of their own. Small boats, coastal missile batteries, sea mines, drones, and mini-subs could force even the most advanced navy into a knife fight. And in a knife fight, one wrong move could trigger history. The destroyer increased speed. Its bow wave thickened under red night lighting. Sailors moved to stations they knew by muscle memory. Electronic warfare operators scanned for emissions. The Aegis system kept tracking the sky, the sea, and the blur of contacts ashore. Close-in weapons stood ready behind their housings like metal predators waiting to wake. On the carrier farther south, the deck crews shifted from fatigue to urgency. 2 Super Hornets on alert were already being prepared for launch. An MH-60R helicopter crew was sprinting toward the hangar. No one said the word attack. Not yet. But everyone aboard knew how quickly harassment could become engagement. Then came the first surprise. One of the Iranian boats abruptly cut its engines and drifted broadside in the water, directly in the path of a civilian tanker, making its slow transit through the shipping lane. The second Iranian craft surged ahead, throwing a white fan of spray. The third disappeared from radar for nearly 4 seconds as it passed through heavy surface clutter near the tanker's hull. For the Americans, that was the most dangerous part. Not what they could see, what they suddenly couldn't. What no one expected happened next. The destroyer's sonar team called out a faint underwater anomaly off the port beam. Brief, metallic, then gone. A second later, another contact appeared, deeper and moving slowly across the formation. It was not a whale, not debris, not the random static of a nervous watch team. Something submerged had entered the picture at exactly the moment the surface craft forced everyone to look up. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. Now the Americans were facing two threats at once. Above the surface, a swarm tactic meant to provoke a response. Below it, something hidden. A mini-sub, a diver delivery vehicle, a drifting mine released at the perfect moment. Nobody knew yet. And in that uncertainty, the margin for error vanished. The commander aboard the destroyer understood the trap immediately. Fire on the boats too soon. He and the United States could be blamed for escalating in one of the world's most sensitive waterways. Wait too long, and a missile, a mine, or a suicide craft could get inside the defensive ring. That was the genius of gray zone maritime pressure. It weaponized hesitation. Another warning was broadcast. This time the message carried the cold tone of finality. Alter course immediately. You are approaching a coalition warship. Keep clear. Still no reply. Instead, the lead Iranian craft snapped on a searchlight and painted the destroyer's bridge in a beam of white that cut through the darkness like an accusation. Cameras were almost certainly rolling. On some coastline operations room, somebody might already be waiting to turn the next 60 seconds into propaganda. Then the American helicopter lifted off. Its rotor wash hammered the deck. Within moments, it was skimming low over the water, sensors hunting, dipping sonar ready, crew scanning with night vision into the cluttered black. Above, the E-2 relayed a wider picture to the strike group, stitching together radar tracks, radio intercepts, and commercial traffic. Two Super Hornets launched from the carrier and raced north, staying outside immediate sight but close enough to respond. The fleet had not fired a shot, but the entire posture had shifted from observation to controlled combat readiness. And still, the Iranian boats kept closing. One crossed inside a range that made every trigger finger tighten. Another turned just enough to suggest a missile launch angle. The tanker in the shipping lane sounded its horn, long and panicked, as if noise alone could push danger away. On the cruiser, missile defense crews tracked the coastline for signs of coastal battery activation. On another screen, an operator watched for drones. Because this was the other nightmare in the Gulf. A surface confrontation that wasn't really about the surface at all. A few seconds of distraction were all it would take for a cruise missile, a loitering munition, or a submerged explosive to finish the job. Then the helicopter crew saw it. Not a submarine. Not exactly. A small, low-profile craft, half-submerged and barely visible in the chop, moving without lights less than a mile from the American destroyer's projected track. It was too small to be a conventional sub and too deliberate to be debris. It could have been an unmanned explosive boat. It could have been laying something in the water. It could have been bait. But whatever it was, it had been positioned with precision. The surface swarm had done its work. It had masked the real move. For a few seconds, the night became a calculation of nightmares. If the object was explosive and reached the destroyer's path, impact or detonation could cripple a billion-dollar warship in one of the busiest shipping corridors on Earth. If it was placing a mine, the consequences could extend far beyond the fleet. Oil tankers, insurance markets, global energy prices, allied navies, headlines in every capital by sunrise. A single tactical stunt could become a strategic earthquake. The American commander made the call. The destroyer altered course hard to port. The cruiser shifted to cover. The helicopter illuminated the low-profile craft with infrared and issued a warning in Persian and English. At the same moment, the lead Iranian speedboat lunged closer, almost daring the U.S. ship to open fire. This was the razor's edge. One burst from a deck gun, and the world would wake to images of burning hulls in the Strait of Hormuz. 1 second of hesitation, and the fleet could lose the initiative. Then came the turning point. The half-submerged craft suddenly stopped. No evasive move, no burst of speed, just stillness. The helicopter crew zoomed in. What they saw didn't lower the tension, it deepened it. The object appeared to be unmanned, packed with equipment, and dragging a cable or tether behind it into the water. Not a simple boat. Something configured for placement, release, or remote detonation. In other words, this had likely never been about getting close to the destroyer. It had been about putting something into the lane while the world watched the surface drama. What no one expected happened next. Instead of pressing the encounter to the brink, the Iranian speedboats peeled away almost simultaneously. Sharp turns, full throttle, back toward the northern darkness. It was so sudden that some on the American bridge thought for one confused moment that the threat had passed. But seasoned officers knew better. Units do not withdraw in perfect timing unless the main job is done. The helicopter crew stayed over the unmanned craft. The destroyer held outside the danger radius. Explosive ordnance procedures were initiated. Sonar kept searching for divers, subs, or companion devices. One of the Super Hornets arrived overhead, invisible to the boats below but fully locked into the tactical picture. The entire scene had transformed from a harassment encounter into a live countermine and force protection operation. And that was the real shock of the night. The bold move near the U.S. fleet had not been designed to win a battle. It had been designed to rewrite the battle space, to show that the narrow waters around Hormuz could be turned hostile in minutes, to force American commanders into split-second decisions while civilian shipping flowed around them, to remind every navy in the region that carriers and destroyers, for all their power, still had to survive the first minute. The disposal team worked under unbearable tension. The helicopter tracked. The destroyer's deck guns stayed trained on empty water where the swarm had been. Every radar operator kept expecting the next shoe to drop. Maybe shore-launched missiles, maybe drones from the coast, maybe another wave of fast attack boats. But the next threat never came. That was almost worse, because it meant the message had already been sent. Hours later, after the object was neutralized and the lane partially secured, the first fragments of understanding emerged. Whether it had been a mine-laying platform, an explosive drone boat, or a decoy intended to trigger a reaction, almost didn't matter anymore. The operation had succeeded in exposing a brutal reality. A navy does not need to sink a carrier to challenge a superpower. Sometimes all it needs to do is force that superpower to defend everything at once. By dawn, the sea looked ordinary again. Commercial ships resumed their transit. The sun spread copper light across the same water that had nearly become a battlefield. From a distance, there was no sign of what had happened in the dark, no smoke, no burning wreckage, no triumphant footage of missiles streaking across the sky. And that, perhaps, was the most chilling part of all. Because the closest calls at sea do not always end with explosions. Sometimes they end with silence, with radio logs, with classified briefings, with exhausted sailors staring at cold coffee, while intelligence officers reconstruct a minute that almost changed the region. Sometimes the most dangerous victory is the one nobody can publicly admit happened. For Iran, the message was clear. Its naval forces could still exploit geography, ambiguity, and nerve in waters where every mile mattered. For the United States, the lesson was harsher. Superior firepower meant little if the enemy could force hesitation at the point of contact. Carriers could launch fighters. Destroyers could track missiles. Cruisers could shield the fleet with layers of radar and interceptors. But none of that erased the oldest terror in naval warfare: the fear of what is close, small, fast, and unseen. And somewhere in a command center, replaying the radar tracks from 2:41 in the morning, someone likely understood what the rest of the world did not. That this had been more than a confrontation, more than a stunt. It was a rehearsal, a demonstration of timing, discipline, and pressure. A reminder that in the Strait of Hormuz, war does not have to begin with a declaration. It can begin with 3 boats, 1 hidden contact, and 60 seconds of uncertainty. That is why the encounter still lingers like a shadow over those waters. Because 1 minute after the Iranian boats made their bold move, the U.S. fleet was no longer dealing with harassment. It was dealing with a layered threat designed to trigger confusion, division, and possibly catastrophe. No missiles needed to be fired. No ship had to sink. The point had already been made. The next crisis might not stop where this one did, and the sailors who stood watch that night knew something the rest of the world prefers to forget. The line between shadow war and open war is not always drawn by politicians, treaties, or speeches. Sometimes it is drawn in darkness, on a radar screen, by a contact moving too fast in the wrong direction, and sometimes by the time everyone realizes how serious it is, that 1 minute is already gone.